session with Dr. Vanessa White from Catholic Theological Union. This is on Augustus Tolton, the spirituality and life, or life and spirituality of Father Augustus Tolton. Dr. White has been in ministry and spiritual formation with lay and religious communities for over 25 years. She's a professed secular Franciscan and currently chairs the USCCB Commission on the Accreditation and Certification for Ministry Formation Programs. She serves as an associate convener for the Black Catholic Theological Symposium and chairs the board of directors of the U.S. Catholic Bishops Commission on Certification and Accreditation. She also sits on the board of trustees of the Divine Word College and the Catechetical Advisory Board for St. Anthony Messenger Press. Her publications include the co-edited book, which you have it on.
Oh, no. This is Tolton. I wasn't putting.
All right. Songs of the Heart and Meditations of the Soul, published by St. Anthony's Press. She was invited to contribute to the CNN series Black in America, and her essay, Authentically Black and Truly Catholic, can be viewed on CNN.com. Recently, she was appointed by His Eminence Cardinal Francis George to the newly formed Tolton Guild, which promotes the cause of canonization of Father Augustus Tolton, which is part and parcel of her topic here today and what it's all about. So, welcome, Dr. White.
Thank you. We are small, but we're mighty.
That's
We're
right.
small, but mighty, yes. So, I guess I should stand behind here since the thing is taking me, so I will be here. This afternoon, I will be talking about the life and spirituality of Father Augustus Tolton, and also speaking some on his legacy. So looking at the legacy, so looking at that also. So, and how I'm going to begin, we'll look at his life. Then we'll look at the spirituality of Father Tolton. Then also give you some information of what exactly the process for the road to canonization, what exactly that looks like and what happens there. And then looking at his legacy. So those will be aspects. Now after this session, up in the front I have lots of freebies. So feel free to take whatever you wish, except those 3 books. Those 3 books are just samples of what we will be doing today. I think I'd like to start, even before talking about his life, about how I got connected to Father Augustus Tolton. I had never heard of him. I grew up Catholic. Been Catholic just about all my life. Never heard about Father Augustus Tolton. Was very active in the church, active in the Black Catholic community. I had not heard of Father Augustus Tolton. Didn't hear about Father Tolton until probably 1989, when I met Sister Jamie Phelps, who at that time was beginning to look at a program that would prepare Black Catholic laymen and women for leadership in the church, and she was naming the program after Father Augustus Tolton. I still didn't know who Father Tolton was till that summer. I went down to the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University in Louisiana, took Father Cyprian Davis's course on the history of Black Catholics, and at that time he didn't have a book about the history of Black Catholics. We were having this class from his notes.
Okay.
So that was, and one of the sessions in his class was on the priesthood in the Black Catholic community. And that's where I heard about Father Augustus Tolton. And then not long after, several years later, I became the director of the Tolton program. But it's interesting, even though I became the director of the Tolton program, still Tolton was just a name. Even though I knew a little bit about the history, I knew a little smidgen about the history. And even though I had in my library the book From Slave to Priest, the first edition, I hadn't really read it. You know, you have lots of books on your shelf, and you don't really read that. Those of us who are students, perpetual students, we may have a lot of those. And so it wasn't really until probably about 5 years ago that I picked up the book again and read it, and I was struck by his life. And then last year, really, when I went down to Quincy, Illinois, and to Brush Creek, Missouri, and I'll talk a few minutes back, where he actually was born and where he was raised, where Augustus Tolton became a living, breathing person, entity. And so since then, I've been fired up, ready to go in speaking about Father Augustus Tolton and making his story known, and particularly making his story known to students, to just the person in the pew, because many aspects of his life really touch upon where we are today as society. So that's basically how I got involved. I want to begin with the early life of Father Tolton. He was born into the institution that was known as slavery. And what we have here, here is actually his baptismal record, a section of his baptismal record. He was born to Martha Jane Chisley, who was 18 years old, who marries Peter Paul Tolton at St. Peter's Church in Brush Creek, Missouri. They were owned by the Elliott family in Brush Creek, Missouri. And in fact, if you look here, it says Augustine, it has Augustine. And I'll talk a few minutes more about his name. It says Augustine, and it says his birth date of the 1st of April, 1854. He was baptized May 29th, 1854, slave of Stephen Elliott. And that was basically how the records were kept. It would be like a long list, and you see the names of the slaves. So on August 1st, he was born. Several years earlier, his brother, Charles, was born. And he was baptized, as I said, on May 29, 1854. Here's a picture of St. Peter's Brush Creek Church. This actually is not the church that he was baptized in, was on that site. And in fact, some records show that he probably may have been in this church before it was, before the family escaped. This was like the third St. Peter's church built on that property. Now in 1861, around the time of the Civil War, several things happened. One, his father escaped to join the Union Army. And later they found out that he had passed away and died. But leaving Martha and the 3 children on the Elliott farm. And so one day, she said, it's time to go. And what happened is that she traveled 40 miles from the Elliott farm to Hannibal, around that area, Hannibal, Missouri, to the Mississippi River. And she traveled primarily at night. At this time, she had let's say, I think Charles was about 11 or 12. Augustine was 8, and Anne was about 18 to 24 months. And so they traveled at night along. They tried to travel. They said probably traveled maybe along the creek, but then at some point they crossed the Mississippi in a boat. They couldn't swim. The story goes that Confederate soldiers were shooting at them. They made it across to Illinois, so they made it from slavery to freedom. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is regarding his name, because I mentioned I would make known about that. He has, in many of the records, it says Augustine, but you notice that lately you see the term Augustus. So what is his name? Is his name Augustus or is his name Augustine? His great-grandniece, Sabrina Penn, she's a descendant of the younger sister Anne, says that the maternal grandfather was named Augustus. And that what happened was that when he went to go to get baptized, you're not going to baptize a person with Augustus named for Caesar, so the name was changed to Augustine. And so on the baptismal record it was Augustine, but he was always known as Augustus in the family, or Gus. He was known as Gus. Now, it was interesting that all the records that have his signature on them, he signs A. He does not sign Augustine on any letters. You know, we saw several little notes that he had written, and it says A. He was known by Gus. He was called Gus. And one time in one of the books that I read, they said that he was asked about this, and he said that he was named after his grandfather. But back that time you weren't going to speak against the priests who have named you a particular name. So to make sure there wasn't any type of tension, he would just sign A. So it wasn't making his name. So it said in 1861 he arrives in Quincy. Now, the Civil War had begun. They were still, runaway slaves were still captured and sent back, but not as often because, as I said, this time there were other focus. And so he and his family was able to live in Quincy. Now, his life in Quincy. This is a picture that was taken from the archives in Rome of him this was like a picture that was sent with his records to Rome. So this is around the time. So this is before he went to Rome. So I used this to show how he looked as a young person. He was shunned by most of the schools in Quincy, but he was finally welcomed at St. Peter's Catholic Church. At one place, St. Boniface, he was there for about a month, and the families sent angry letters and made his life miserable, so he left there. But at St. Peter's Catholic Church, he was finally welcomed. And so he studied at St. Peter's Church, and while at the same time he was doing some work, around 16 years old, he feels called to the priesthood. Now, what happened around this time is that the Franciscans and also Father Weir, who was at St. Peter's, they helped him in his studies, so they tutored him. So he was tutored for a number of years. Then he attended St. Francis Solanus College, which is today Quincy University, and he did his pre-seminary studies there in his languages, and he was continued to be tutored. Around the time that he was finished with his studies there and began the process of applying to seminaries for further studies in the priesthood, the doors were closed to him. No seminary in the U.S. would accept him, including the Franciscan seminary. The Franciscan fathers who were teaching him wanted him to join, but the leadership did not close their doors. Now, one of the things that I heard, and so I would say that I'm not sure if this is true or not, but that in many places there were laws that blacks and whites do not live together. And so that probably also impacted the fact of him being able to attend the seminary. Around this time, the Mill Hill Fathers, who later became the Josephites, were beginning to investigate the possibility of a seminary for African Americans, but it wasn't a reality until much later. Well, what happened for a number of years, he worked. He was a catechist. He actually was a catechist, and he also worked in the factory to raise monies, and he also received monies from many different Catholic benefactors to finally go to Rome. He was accepted at the Collegium Urbanum de Propaganda Fide, which was the missionary seminary. This was the seminary where young men who were preparing to be missionary priests were sent. And so his idea was that he was going to Africa. He had no sense of coming back here to the United States. He was really excited about going to Africa. For the next few years, the next 6 years, he studied at the college. The picture up there is the college. Picture of the college. This is a picture of him as a seminary student. And so, with all expectations of being ordained and sent to Africa. And he became friends with many of the African seminarians, and this was all in his mind. The day before his ordination, the ordaining ordaining bishop made the decision that he was not going to Africa, that he was going back to the United States. And what was said was that, let us see how enlightened. The United States always states about how enlightened a country it is. Let's see how enlightened they truly are. We are sending you back to be the first Negro priest in the United States. And so imagine the shock that you've been studying, your whole thought, your whole passion, your focus is that you don't have to go back to this place that has shunned you, where you have been considered less than human, that you are going someplace else, and then the night before your ordination, you're told otherwise. And and he knew this is what God, or he felt this is what God was planning. So he was ordained on April 24th, 1886 at St. John Lateran Basilica. That's this picture down here in Rome. And as I said, he was told he would return to the United States. Now he came back to Quincy on July 24th, 1886. I forgot to mention, on April 24th, 1886 was when he was ordained a Roman Catholic priest. And so in July 25th, 1886, he was appointed pastor of St. Joseph's Church in Quincy. And here's just a artistic depiction of St. Joseph's Church. It's no longer on the site in Quincy. There's actually a marker that says this is the church that Father Augustus was the pastor. Now, it's known that he counseled and ministered to both black and white Catholics. Though St. Joseph's Church was the church for the black community, what happened is that those black Catholics who were in the vicinity of other churches could not go to that church. They would come to St. Joseph's. Down the street was St. Boniface, not far away. And many of the St. Boniface parishioners began going to St. Joseph's Church. They had heard that he was a charismatic preacher. He was supposed to be known as a charismatic preacher. He also was known, as I said, for his pastoral skills of listening and being present. Now, let me just say, that didn't sit well with the other clergy. And they actually wrote to the bishop and said that he needs to stop. I'll clean up the language that they use, but they use derogatory language that is used toward African Americans to describe this black priest, and he needs to be told to turn the white people away from St. Joseph's. And he's known that he's quoted as saying that I thought the doors of the Catholic Church were to be opened, not to be closed. And so he also began writing to his superiors. Since he was a priest who was ordained in Rome, then he had to, for any type of permission or any type of changes, he had to write to the papal superiors to get any changes. And he wanted to leave, and no, you stay. The clergy isolated him, and his work was severely curtailed while he was in Quincy. It really made his life, particularly Father Weiss, who changed that picture. I was about to say Father Weiss, but I think that's Father correctly. you have Father Michael Weiss of St. Boniface, who came there in November 1887. And when he came to Quincy, he really, it sounds like he hated Father Tolton, and began to write letters, just really made his life miserable. Now, around 1889, Archbishop Fian of Chicago he may have heard about Father Tolton a little earlier, but he began hearing about this Negro priest. And you can imagine the fact that he was the only one in the United States that news would get back all over about him. And so he, in fact, invited Father Tolton to come to Chicago to be the first pastor of the Black Catholic community in Chicago. And so Father Tolton wrote to his superiors and finally got the assent to go to Chicago. And that's Archbishop Fian there. It's Catherine Drexel, and I'll talk about her in a few minutes. So in December 1889, sorry, that's a mistake. 1889, he came to Chicago. And so he arrived to minister to the Black Catholic community. Now let me tell you a little bit about the Black Catholic community at this time. The Black Catholic community was spread out, dispersed throughout various parts of Chicago. They were allowed to come together in the basement of St. Mary's. For those in Chicago, old St. Mary's around that site. It's that community. The basement community was called St. Augustine. And so the Black Catholics of Chicago went to St. Augustine's in the basement because they were not welcomed in any of the other Catholic churches in the Archdiocese of Chicago. And so that's where Bishop Fian wanted, in some ways, to be pastoral toward that Black Catholic community, and so invited Father Tolton to come up. Now, he arrived and he brought his mother with him. His mother became his housekeeper. And around, his rectory was around the 36th and Dearborn area. And what he began contemplating with the parishioners of St. Augustine's was building a church for the community. And building the church would be named St. Monica's. And those of you know a little bit of our Catholic history, St. Monica is the mother of St. Augustine. And so this church began to be built. Now, he sent several letters to Mother Catherine Drexel. Now, Catherine Drexel was the foundress of the Blessed Sacrament Sisters. And she was also a heiress. Family had a lot of money. The Drexel family had a lot of money. And so when she came into religious life, her money came with her. That was her dowry, came with her. And so he wrote Mother Drexel with the possibilities of getting some monies for this church. And I heard from several different sources that she may have given close to like $10,000 to Father Tolton to build the church. One of the books up here, From Slave to Priest, has copies of those letters, some of those letters. So I recommend that book. But this picture here is the St. Monica's Church in Chicago. It's primarily the outside of that church. It wasn't fully completed. It was partially built at the time of his death. It wasn't. So they said he came here. He not only was he focused on that community around the 36th and Dearborn area. It was like almost like a 2-block type of radius that he was responsible for. And he was known during the time that he ministered in Chicago of ministering in the alleyways and the streets. There are some stories of children in the wintertime holding on to his cassock, and he's pulling the children in the snow. And he worked tirelessly for the community. Also, at the same time, he was beginning to be known nationally as the only black priest only Negro priest in the United States. And so he was asked to speak. And so he spoke in Texas. He spoke at the very first Black Catholic Congress. And he was traveling as well as ministering to the community, because I think he really did see the fact of his life as an example and wanting to minister to his community, not just his community in Chicago, but to the larger community. He worked tirelessly, and that he was in Chicago for about 11 years. Now, near the end of his life, like that last year of his life, stories go that he was ill, and that sometimes he was so ill that he could not stand to consecrate the Eucharist, and that he had to sometimes have a chair so that he could do that. In the beginning of July, he went on a retreat. Some stories say that it was a priest retreat, and that on July, I think that 8th, because I think 8th and 9th was like the hottest time of the year. There were stories about how hot it was on that time of year. So he got off the train and began walking, and he collapsed. And he was taken to Mercy Hospital, which is the closest hospital. Stories go that initially he was not admitted to Mercy Hospital because he wasn't admitted to until they found out he was a priest. And when they found out he was a priest, he was admitted. But he had passed away. He never was revived, and he died. And the obituary says he died of complications of heat stroke. Now, at the time of his passing, he had stated that he wished to be buried in Quincy. And so there were two funeral masses. There was one funeral mass at St. Monica's in Chicago, and then his body was sent to Quincy. And the second funeral mass was at St. Peter's in Quincy. And then he was buried at St. Peter's Cemetery in Quincy. There was another priest who had this plot. I can't remember the name offhand. But the other priest had this plot and bought the plot, and he gave the plot, shared the plot with Father Tolton. And so this is actually pictures of the cross that is on that plot now, as well as the tombstone that says Reverend Augustus Tolton, the first colored priest in the United States. And so he was buried there, and then later the other priest is buried. And it appears to be the other priest is buried right next to Father Tolton. Any questions so far?
So that made him how old at that point?
43. He was 43 years old when he passed away. So he's quite young. Yes.
Vanessa, explain the symbol on the cross that looks like a dollar sign.
Right. Now, it's not a dollar sign, it's a Greek symbol, but how it looks like, it's a Greek symbol, I think it's a Greek symbol for Christ, that's what was told to me. But that how they carved it,
they didn't get it right.
They didn't get it right, or just how it's carved, that it looks like a dollar sign, because we all thought it was a dollar sign. It was also interesting, is that the first pilgrimage I went on, I've done 3. The first one last year was the first time I went down to QUINCY. At that point, like these flowers are from the most recent. They cleaned up the place, and I'll speak about that in a few minutes. Things got cleaned up. But when I went down there were pennies on
Well, people just threw pennies.
put pennies, and they said that the Friends of Father Tolton, that there's a group called the Friends of Father Tolton, had asked people to put pennies there to as like a marker that they had been there. So it was really strange putting a penny, and then you look up here and saw the dollar sign. Right, exactly. So I think when we went there this time, there were no pennies around. So I think they realized it really was confusing for people.
Right.
To people. That's probably the best way I'll say it. Confusing to people. But yes, that his sister and his mother remained in Chicago.
Okay.
His mother became the housekeeper for the next priest who took Father Tolton's place. Several years later, the St. Monica's community became absorbed into St. Elizabeth's. The Divine Word missionaries came. And so the church was never completed. And if you go to St. Elizabeth's, there's a marker about Father Tolton, and they say that they are the church that Father Tolton first church. But the actuality was that they welcomed in the St. Monica's community into St. Elizabeth's.
Was the church at St. Monica's, was St. Monica's ever completed to the point where they actually held services there?
I think they did. I think they did have services there. It was a functioning. It was a functioning church. I don't know if it was complete. Like totally. But it was complete in the sense that it had that they had mass there. And that picture that I showed is like the only picture I know of.
Yeah, it's the only one I've seen.
Now, looking at the spirituality of Father Tolton, I like to speak of his spirituality as a spirituality of hope and humility. There's a sense of hope and humility, that there are 3 aspects to his spirituality. The spirituality, he had a discerning spirit. He was open to the Spirit of God moving in his life. And I think you see that in reading the books, how he came to respond to his call, how even the sense when the doors were closed, he was a catechist, the whole sense of discerning and moving in his growth and development as a minister. And that discernment taking place even when, on the night before he was to be ordained, to be told that no, this isn't the case. And the spirit of discernment discernment, according to Karl Reiner, has several different aspects. One, it's a discerning spirit is one that is open to the Spirit of God. 2, there is a sense of radical peace. 3, a spirit of prayer. And there's stories of how deep that Father Tolton daily prayed the rosary after meals. There's a story of him, a visitor came to stay with him for a while, the person was studying, and wrote a letter about how intense Father Tolton's prayer was with the rosary, and how lovingly he held the rosary. And his mother, he knelt down and prayed, and he had to speak rosary behind his chair. And then 4, that it's open to community. A discerning spirit is one that is connected to the community, that it's outward. It isn't just for you, it's for the sense of the community. And if you look at his life, that is, he always was about the community. He tirelessly ministered to the communities. And it wasn't just the black community, but it was the broader community. So Those four aspects of discerning spirit. Also, a spirit of perseverance that's rooted in hope. If you think about the fact that when he felt, it was about 10 years from the time he felt called to the priesthood, that he was able actually to even go to Rome. And he was constantly told no, no, no. When he became a priest, he was no, no, no. And he persevered. There aren't any stories of him getting angry. I'm not saying he didn't get angry, but there are no stories of this. The stories are that he had, and it was a joyful spirit, even in the midst. There may have been some frustration, but that there was this sense of perseverance. That even though when it was closed, he kept persevering. When there wasn't monies, he began working in the factories. When the monies for his church, he persevered. He kept writing letters. He didn't just write one letter. They said he wrote a number of letters to Mother Catherine Drexel. So that whole sense of perseverance. And so I really, that perseverance that is rooted in the hope of Jesus Christ. That is the hope of Jesus Christ. And then 3, reconciliation in diversity. There is that sense that he brought peoples together. He brought varieties of different peoples together. And that black and white, he said the doors were not to be shut, the doors were to be opened. That he never, though he was named as the first Negro priest, it's not said that he ever called himself the first black priest. And when he came to Chicago, in fact, they said that he got along well with the clergy in Chicago. That there was interactions with the other clergy in Chicago. I think about these 3 aspects. I'm the type of person I work in 3s. 3 seem to be that number, Trinitarian number you can work with. When I was about a couple of months ago, I spoke to the Paul students who came out to the Hyde Park area. They were doing some different visits. It was one of Peter Casarelli's classes, and so we were meeting we met over at a Thai restaurant. And I spoke particularly on that sense of perseverance. Like, what does Father Tolton have to say to us today? And looking at his spirituality, the discerning spirit, that spirit of perseverance, the spirit of reconciliation. And so looking at that sense of perseverance, that as young people, particularly, and older people too, many times we may be told that we cannot do certain things. And there's that sense of, why are you trying that? That's silly. Why are you going to do that? And I said, Father Tolton is someone that you can look to, someone you can talk to, because he understands having every door closed. Every door closed. But he focused on the hope of Jesus Christ, and that hope of, as I've learned, that if it's something that God means for you to do, a way will be found. And so Father Tolton can connect with that aspect of the struggles that a person may be going through. That sense of the discerning spirit, of being open to what God has in store for you. That many times being open to that spirit, your life things that may happen may be more than you can possibly imagine.
Sure.
And Father Tolton is a testament of that. Who would have thought that a young boy born into slavery in Brush Creek, Missouri, would one day travel to Rome, study with students from all over the world, and be ordained a Roman Catholic priest? And then that sense of reconciliation, that we need to understand that we are one church, that we may be diverse, but as Father Tolton said, the doors of the Catholic Church are not meant to be closed, they're meant to be open. So how are we welcoming our brothers and sisters of different nationalities and of different faiths? Sense of welcome. So those are three aspects of his spirituality that I think speak to us today.
May I add something? At least on the reconciliation end of it. What I see also, how his cause for canonization today has a reconciling spirit to it in at least a couple ways. That in the Black Catholic community in Chicago, it's a historical record that he is kind of the founder of that community. But his cause for canonization has been spearheaded, at least introduced through the Archbishop of Chicago. This is a cause that the whole city of Chicago needs to embrace and is beginning to embrace. And he becomes kind of like a gift from our community to the whole Archdiocese. So there's a reconciliation around that. I see it also as it's certainly a cause out of Chicago, but it's a cause out of the Springfield diocese. It also becomes an Illinois, and anybody who understands the politics in Illinois, that you got Chicago and you got the rest of the state. And so it's kind of a possible reconciliation around that. There's Missouri and Illinois together. So I mean, he's bringing people together.
He really is bringing people together. Yeah. That whole sense that he is not a saint, and it's a good transition. He's not just for Quincy, Illinois. He's not just for Chicago, Illinois. No. He's not just for the Black Catholics. No. He's not just for the white Catholics. No. That he is, his life and the testimony of his life is for all. It's for all. And so let's talk a little bit about the road to canonization. Now last year, Cardinal George did what is the preliminary step, which is the bishop introduces the cause. And so it was around February when he began announcing. In fact, he did one big announcement at the Harambe, our Tolton fundraiser, when we had our 20th anniversary Mass, and he announced there to the people that he was introducing the cause. And the cause was introduced during the Year of the Priest. And what Cardinal George said is that he was reflecting and praying about the Year of the Priest, and he wanted to find a priest whose life was holy and that could be possibly up for canonization. And so it was like he realized that he had a priest in his own, as I said, backyard. And so what happens is that he then decides he's going to choose someone who will begin the initial investigations, who in a sense becomes what's called as the postulator. Postulator. And that person who was chosen was Bishop Joseph M. Perry. And so then what happens is that over the course of the next few months, you do some preliminary research to see if there is even anything that you could bring to, in a sense, the Vatican that would say this person could be a candidate. So what happened is that last year began that preliminary step. And so the preliminary step began. What happened was that Bishop Perry went down to Quincy. He, in fact, the second pilgrimage, I did this pilgrimage in April for Tolton Scholars. In September, Bishop Perry went with about 30 other pilgrims. It was a pilgrimage that I helped to organize. And this was his first trip ever to Quincy. And he went down to see the different sites and gather information and talk to some people and to gain some things. So he began compiling some materials, and then in the late fall, he went to Rome. And what he did was present this preliminary information to the Congregation for the Cause of Saints. And so then what happens, because he presents this information, it doesn't mean that they have to accept it. And several things came about from that initial conversation. One, the question came, why now? You know, why at this time? He's been dead for over 100 years. Why has it taken so long to even suggest his cause? And so the bishop had to report about the context of living in the United States of America. And that, in a sense, this context where Father Tolton came out of a time of enslavement, then later a reconstruction. We have, then later he had passed away, but Jim Crow, time of Jim Crow, a time of segregation. I mean, churches in the United States, in Chicago, were segregated up to, and many of them still are, but I know in the 60s, you definitely didn't go to certain churches. So you have within the United States, if bishops are being raised out of this type of context, it can become very difficult for them even to realize. It took Cardinal George, I've had this person in my view at all this time. So speaking that out of that context of racism that is a part of being here in the U.S., it makes it difficult for even seeing that his life, the sanctity of his life, that such a cause could take place. And even the struggles for black men in the seminary up to even the present time. So that information had to be given to Rome. And Rome doesn't understand this context. But one of the things that they were open to receiving this information, and they, in fact, the bishop says that they were in many ways excited about the possibility of a saint emerging from this time, and so they were really pushing. So they received the information and said, yes, there seems to be enough that we have here to begin the cause. And so what happens is a panel of theologians and clergy, cardinals, laity, evaluate the candidate's life. And so they did initial evaluation, and what happened was that on February 24th, they officially said there's enough that we have here that he can be considered a candidate for sainthood, and he is now designated Servant of God. So his title now is Servant of God, Father Augustus Tolton. And what happened on the 24th of February at St. Joseph's Chapel in Quigley was that the historical commission, you have to designate a historical commission, 3 persons who have to investigate his life and also investigate the context of his life. So they to investigate about that time, and a variety of other things. Then you have a theological commission. The theological commission, which is made up of 3 members, has to look at what writings he has, what sayings, if he's okay, and whether what he has to say, there isn't any heresy in what he has written and what he's saying. Look at the theological meaning of his life. Then also what has to be developed is a Tolton Guild. The Guild is formed to promote the cause through both spiritual and educational endeavors, and also in the sense of raising monies, because it costs a lot of money to have a cause continue. And when I initially said this, we were like, what do you mean it costs money? You have to be mindful of the fact that the Historical Commission and the Theological Commission have to travel, they have to collect materials, monies that they need for to do the research that they need to do that research. Anytime that you have Vatican officials come over, you have to pay for everything for the Vatican officials. That includes airfare, that includes hotel. When we had the first canonical session at February 24th, all the Historical Commission, you had to fly them in. It costs. It costs usually several $100,000 for a cause for St. And you finally get all. You have to go and interview people. The postulator for the cause and others have to go interview. Let's say a person. We have a case already down in Florida, possible. I think it's in Florida, possible healing, miraculous healing. The team has to go down there to investigate the money. So it really, when you think about those things, it's like you can see why a lot of holy men and women who could be saints, may not have that opportunity to go through all those steps. Well, anyway, when all this, when they get all this information is collected. This initial information, the Theological Commission, the Historical Commission, and all that is collected. Then what happens is that is sent to Rome. And let me give you an example of someone who just, and that person becomes venerable. If the panel approves, that person becomes venerable. Now, let me tell you, we have another saint who is an African saint, Henriette DeLille, who's just been proclaimed venerable. What happened, Father Cyprian Davis, who was also on the Historical Commission for this cause for Father Tolton, had done the initial investigation the summer of 5 years ago, so it had been 2005, was that 2006? What was the year of Katrina? Was it 2006? I think it was. 2006. The summer of 2006, the Vatican persons had just came that summer to New Orleans, because that's where she is, and where her shrine and where she was born. And they had collected all this information. There's materials, her pictures, her writings, and everything. All this, the Holy Family Sisters. She's the founders of the Holy Family Sisters. They had collected all this information. The Vatican came. They had to give testimony. Father Cyprian had to give testimony. They just sent all those materials to Rome when Katrina hit, and the entire convent was flooded. All those materials that would have been in there would have been ruined if they had that summer. They had just sent those to Rome. That's a miracle right there. I'm telling you, God wants something to happen. It's going to happen. But so that happened, and all those materials had been sent to Rome, and they had were able to go through all those materials. And so this fall, she became venerable. So what happens now, when they're at the stage of venerable, now all you're waiting for is a miracle. So we have they've gone through the first two steps. You've collected all the materials. It's been sent to Rome. Rome, the cause says, yes, this person's life, sanctity of this person's life is one that we can continue the process. Now all we wait for is a miracle. Now, the next step is beatification, which allows a person to be honored by a particular group or region. Now, in order to beatify a candidate, it must be shown that the person is responsible for posthumous. My words.
Posthumous.
Thank you, posthumous. Sometimes you can't say words when you see them.
You look at it.
Posthumous miracle. Now, martyrs, those who died for their religious cause, can be beatified without evidence of a miracle. Now, on October 20th, 2003, Mother Teresa was beatified. She is now known as blessed. So the beatification stage there, known as blessed. One miracle. Now, Pope John Paul in 1999 speeded up the cause for sainthood. It used to be, it had to be 5 years before you could begin a cause. But John Paul got rid of that, and that helped because they wanted to get Mother Teresa blessed. But so what we are now is what we would need is one miracle. He is not a martyr, right. So we need 2 miracles. If he was a martyr, we'd only need 1 miracle. But he's not a martyr, so we need 2 miracles. And these miracles have to be a physical miracle. So you can have spiritual healings, you can have emotional healings, but what finally gets the movement going is that there has to be a physical healing. And there has to be, it has to be shown that in no way, shape, or form they cannot figure out how in the world this happened. And usually, a part of this panel is always atheists. It's always a part of the advocation panel, because if atheist says, I can't figure out how this happened, then pretty much you say that there was. So you have that. If they get 1 miracle, then the person becomes blessed. Then you have 2 miracles, the person becomes a saint. And so that is where we're at now. Now, Pope John Paul II, we found a miracle. And so in May, we will have a big celebration in Rome where he is designated blessed, Pope John Paul II. So that's where we are right now, is that we're in this stage of beginning this official process. So, and that this is a process for the whole church, not just for a particular part. So he is servant of God, Father Augustus Tolton. Any questions?
Yeah. What kind of materials are there? Did he write journals or letters or?
He wrote several letters. Right now we have 12 pieces. We have 12 documents. During Bishop period, we have 12 documents that they're looking at. Some of them are letters to Catherine Drexel. They don't have any written text of his homilies, so we don't have anything like that. But who knows? You know, it's been interesting, the different things that have come up. I was talking to someone who said that a priest, that Father Ed Branch, may have a copy framed of.
Yeah, I saw it.
You saw it of the first Mass?
Mm-hmm.
So I told Bishop Perry didn't know that one, so I told Bishop Perry that. So he's go down and check that out. So see, that's another cost. You got to fly down there and check that out.
To see
so,
if he has. This would be his homily. Would be
this would just be the fact of that there was a first Mass.
Right.
So you have to collect every bit of documentation. So anything has to be collected, because you have binders. I mean, there's huge binders that are sent. A good friend of mine is on the Historical Commission, and Dr. Cecilia Moore, and she will be writing about the context of slavery, looking at that and what that institution was like. One of the Bishop Cardinal George said something that really struck me about Father Augustus Tolton, and one was that he was born in original sin. In 2 senses, born in original sin, or grew up into the institution of slavery, another sin. And that, you know, these two, thinking of that, it's like, oh yeah, you know, that's,
Now,
yes.
the miracles, these will have to be two miracles that are found during his life.
No, this is what, these miracles have to be found after his life. It has to show that he has such a close relationship with God.
Okay.
That his prayers, that, let's say, when you talk, you know, let's say I say, will you pray for me?
Yeah.
I say, Andrew, will you pray for me? And you say, yeah, I'll pray for you. Now, so I'm going to say, Father Augustus Tolton, will you pray for me? And because Father Tolton prayed for me, suddenly there was this, I was healed of this cancer. And I had gone to the doctor. The doctor had said it is, the cancer is through my body. And when I began praying this prayer, the Father Tolton, asking for Father Tolton to pray for me, please pray for me, that somehow, when I went back to the doctor, it was gone. And so that's one. So one of the things during this whole sense of this cause, one of the things you begin to do is that you begin to ask people, pray to Father.
Oh, okay, that's why.
That's why. Pray to Father Augustus Tolton. That's what. And mention that request.
Okay.
You know.
How do you, well, like a good example, and you know, maybe we got something here. This whole notion of praying to Father Tolton, this is something that's, you know, I'm new in, so to speak. As this cause is advancing, and I'm getting on board, and I'm you know, just starting to do that. Dear friend of mine, just a few weeks ago, there were all indications that he had some type of brain, what do you call it? Not a tumor.
Hemorrhage?
Aneurysm?
An aneurysm.
Okay.
And there were symptoms of that. And so it's part of our couples group. So he said, we all going to pray for him. And it's something we do for each other in this group. We pray for each other. I made a point of praying to Father Tolton, asking for, you know, an intercession, not for healing. And John just reported to us last week, they went and ran the latest test, it's gone.
Well, see, what you would be asked
So
to do right now, what you would have to do is you would send a narrative to Bishop Perry. Then what will happen is Bishop Perry will come out and interview you, and probably then some others, you will be interviewed to show that you prayed on this particular day.
Okay.
And you were praying this, and you prayed specifically, whatever, and that. It's a long process of
Very meticulous.
Very meticulous. That's why we don't have we have a lot that are in the servant of God and in the venerable, but they don't make it to the beatification,
right,
or the sanctification.
They don't get the miracle.
So you have so that's why we are passing the prayer cards. Why those? Because of that whole process, and we're asking people to pray. That's the why. Because sometimes, and this is a good point, because sometimes we ask people to do things and we don't give them the why and the meaning of it. What the meaning of it. That's why this part is important. To understand the meaning. This is why this is important. Jim?
I just have a historical question. I don't know if you know. So after he was ordained as the first black priest in the United States, then what happened? Like in terms of how did anything evolve between, what was it, 1880, when he was ordained in 1886? So obviously he couldn't get into U.S. seminaries. So when was there a time? How long did it take before
it was the
other black?
The book to read is Desegregating the Altar by Stephen Ochs, O-C-H-S, and it was the Josephites. I believe it was early 19. I think it hit the 20th century. I think it was like 1901. specifically think.
Early 1900s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Charles Uncles was the first priest ordained in the U.S., United States.
So he attended the seminary.
He attended the Josephite seminary. The Mill Hill Fathers became the Josephites. And in fact, the Josephites for a long time had the most African American priests, those who ordained.
In New Orleans?
No, in the United States, the Josephites.
But where would they physically? What was the
Oh,
seminary?
it was the seminary was located in, was it Baltimore?
Oh, so it was.
Right.
Baltimore.
And yes, it was in Baltimore. So it was in Baltimore, and Mill Hill Josephites went throughout the United States. So they weren't just for Baltimore.
Okay.
They went to the variety of Josephite parishes. So for a while they were ordained just one, because as I said, there was a big controversy, and it's for another time, but there was a big controversy even in regard to the criteria for African American to be ordained a priest. The criteria was much more stringent, and it was a longer period of preparation. Because the other thing that we don't even talk about was the fact, because of the stereotype of black people as sexualized, the sexualization of black people, the question came that black people could not be celibate. This was the stereotype. So that, and because we were considered less than human, we did not have the discipline to refrain from our animal urges. Just so to speak plain, this was, and see, this is what Dr. Cecilia Moore will be writing about. The context of what people thought and believed at that time, that how Father Tolton could emerge from this in spite of these what was going on. That's what she will be doing some of the research around. Yes.
It was after he died. Tolton had already died before the next.
Right.
Yes.
Priest.
Mm-hmm.
And to give it a kind of a local context, the next black priest to serve in the Archdiocese of Chicago was actually 50 years later,
Right.
1947.
Mm-hmm.
Rollins
Those will be
Lambert.
my
I think
next.
it was later, 49.
49 was it?
49.
So even
Rollins
more than 50
Lambert
years,
was
yeah.
first. The second one is George Clemens.
Yeah, let's see.
Really?
Second priest ordained for the Archdiocese of Chicago was George Clemens.
56
Yes.
or something like that.
Mhm. So this is what you're talking about, in the sense of what some of the things that happens in that respect. Yes.
I want to make you repeat yourself, Vanessa, but I'm not thinking just about the Paul, but all the universities in Chicago. What could they do to help the Historical Commission? What could they do to help with research, programming, teaching? Because part of the advocation is the miracle, but it's also the sense that the people of God want this, right?
Right. It's the people. Right. It's the people of God want this. So one of the things that has to begin to happen is that even in our educational system, we need to be telling the story. We need to be telling the story. When we're talking about the Catholic Church, and we're talking about the history of the Catholic Church, we need to tell this aspect of the history of the Church, and speak about, as I said, one of the things that I'm trying to do some writing on is looking at the spirituality of Father Tolton. Because what we need to do is connect his life to what meaning does it have for today. And so looking at his spirituality, looking at that spiritual thread that weaves through his life and how that connects to the people of today. Because that is how you animate a people to want to speak about, or want to push a particular cause. And then the other thing that we're doing that I think is very important is that we're beginning these pilgrimages. I think the pilgrimage, and I'm going to talk about that next, the whole sense of pilgrimage I think is very important to the whole sense of the pushing of this cause and the movement of the cause. And so I think that's another important aspect. Let me speak some onto the legacy and looking at that legacy. One of the legacies, there's several programs in the diocese that have been named after Father Augustus Tolton. One of the earliest is the Augustus Tolton Scholars Program, which was founded in 1990. Andrew Like journeyed through it for a short time. He's there, and these are some of our Tolton scholars Now, the Tolton Scholars Program prepares Roman Catholic African American men and women for ministerial leadership in the Archdiocese of Chicago. And I should even bridge that because I'm beginning to use the term black because we have scholars who come from a variety of different. Because African American, usually you think of those who are born in the U.S. context, and we have had scholars who have come from Ghana. We have a scholar now from Haiti who lives, very clearly identifies with those communities, who are preparing for ministerial leadership in Chicago. But the program was birthed out of that sense of looking at Father Augustus Tolton's life, looking at the fact that he ultimately ministered here in Chicago, and that there's several, as I told my Tolton scholars, one of the things he did was raise money. He was raising money. Tolton scholars like raise money. So that's part of that legacy. And when they even read together that, it made sense. Okay, why do we have to do this? Well, we come out of this legacy. So that's one of, another is that the Father Tolton Catholic Regional High School is preparing to open in September 2011. And it'll be the first Catholic high school in Columbia, Missouri, named after Father Augustus Tolton. Actually, if you go on the site, type in Father Tolton High School, they have a whole series of pictures of how the school is being built, whatever. So this is happening. And then the pilgrimages. This was one that was April 30th, May 2nd, 2010. It was this pilgrimage primarily. It began before we knew about the cause. It was developed, it was birthed before we knew about the cause. The 2010 was the 20th anniversary of the Augustus Tolton program. And one of the things that I wanted to do is bring the scholars and others who wish to join down to Quincy to have that connection with who Father Tolton was, to get a sense of where he grew up. And so a lot of these are Tolton scholars and other friends. And what was interesting was then in March was when Cardinal George announced, and Bishop Perry announced that they were going to begin the process for the cause. And one of the first things that Bishop Perry, Cardinal George said to me, we wish you'd let us know when you were doing this so we could have worked our schedule. And my thing, what I was thinking is that I wasn't doing this
for this.
for that reason. So what happened was that the next pilgrimage, I don't have a picture of that one, I have a picture of its third pilgrimage, I'll show that in a second. But then in September 17th to the 19th, Bishop Perry, I helped to organize a pilgrimage with Bishop Perry, and we had about 25, 30 people again who went down to Quincy. And that was Bishop Perry's first time ever being in Quincy and in Brush Creek. And so we went to Brush Creek. This is Brush Creek. This is the church, the area of the church that he was baptized. So this is the St. Peter's Brush Creek Church in Missouri. And so we took that, we went to varieties of different places. We always would pray the prayer, the Tolton prayer at the different sites. So that became part of the pilgrimages, praying that prayer. But then, on April 6th, 7th, just this past week, I took a third group down to Brush Creek and to Quincy. This group had a twofold reason for being. One was the canonical examination of the gravesite. What you have to do now, as part of the process, and this is the very initial part of the process, they need to take pictures to say that there is actually a grave about you. Because a person can be said, come up with a name, and there may not actually be a person such as St. Christopher. I mean, that's probably the most well-known case of St. Christopher. So now you have to prove that there was actually a person, and there's a person buried in this tomb. So what happened at this part of the process, they just have to take pictures. Now, as part of the whole process, the canonical process, they're going to have to excavate that tomb.
That was my next question.
Yes. They will. This hasn't happened yet. They have to excavate. And one of the things what was important for them to figure out this time was, because remember I told you there's someone else buried in that tomb? And the question came initially, was that person on top of Father Tolton, and you're going to have to move there, whatever.
Right.
Well, what it turns out is that this, I think it's, I can't think of the priest's name, who's buried in the same Augustus spot. He, in fact, put a piece of concrete around to lay his body next to Father Tolton. So he's not on top of Father Tolton, he's right next to Father Tolton. So what they'll have to excavate the body, zoom the body, and they'll have to open it out. So people are saying, well, what if it turns out his body's intact? Because it could, there are those things that the body's intact. Would that be considered a miracle?
That would be the first.
I don't know. But this picture was taken at the Brush Creek. Cardinal George, one of the things that Cardinal George said, I think you overheard him say that too, that when he arrived, he was thinking of this more as a historical visit, visiting the historical sites. But when he prayed at the cemetery in Quincy, it became a pilgrimage for him. And so that transformation. And one of the things that Bishop Perry has said, that since he's been down there, he talks to Tolton every day. That's just the relationality of time. But I'm over there, lone woman, see a bishops and priests. So this group was the seminarians, several seminarians from the University of St. Mary the Lake. Also several of the priests. This is Father Roy Bauer. Father Roy Bauer is like the Tolton expert in Quincy. He's written some of the initial writings and everything. So that's there. Father Michael Penn, who is the caretaker of this church. It's not, I don't think it's used regularly. It's more, but it was, think of the earlier picture when I showed you the gravesite with those flowers. That was for the cardinal. We hadn't seen it. I hadn't seen flowers on the other two occasions.
Okay.
They cleaned up, but and there at the very end is Andrew Light, director of the Gospel Black Catholics. So that is where we are now. So this has just happened. So they took pictures of the grave site, and that will be as part of that whole record that will be going an initial history. Bishop Perry has to do another initial report. Do you remember what he said? He said, it's like in the next month or so.
Yeah, soon. May something.
Yeah, yes,
Will you make that public? Will you make that public?
Make what public?
I'm sure it all will be.
Sure, at some point it probably all will be, but I'm not sure. He's very protective right now of the material. Now, one of the things that is also happening, and you can get further information from Andrew Light, the director of the Office of Black Catholics, but there is, we are celebrating the 125th anniversary of the priestly ordination of Father Augustus Tolton. And what will happen, what we are trying to do is have something down at Quincy, so that Quincy begins to feel a part of this whole sense of the cause. And so what we will have is we'll have Holy Mass down on June 5th at 3 p.m. on Sunday, and then a program following at Quincy College, so the college where he actually studied. We'll have a program there. And so we're telling people, it's primarily for the people in the Springfield diocese, because Quincy is part of the Springfield diocese, but we're inviting people from Chicago to come down and be a part of that. And so reservations are $30, that would include the dinner, and to make your check payable to the Vicariate 6th office, but you can get more information and more details from the Office of Black Catholics. And so Andrew Light will have flyers, and I'll also make sure you can get flyers, because he sent me the flyers, so making sure the flyers are out. But this is being sponsored by the Tolton Guild. Remember, the Tolton Guild is responsible for promoting. I'm a charter member of the Tolton Guild. There's 3 parts to beginning that initial phase of
opening the cause, you must have a historical commission, a theological commission, and a guild. And the guild is appointed by the cardinal. And so there are members of the guild. I'm a part of that guild. And you will be a part of the
ex
guild.
officio
Guild,
kind of
as
thing.
the director of the Office of Black Catholics, will be part of that guild. So it's our responsibility. One of the things that we've been talking about already is looking at, over the course of the year, having an annual pilgrimage. Probably be in September. Official like September is fall, nice. And that's a good time, is before you get busy with all the liturgical year stuff. And then in November, we're having a big fundraiser to raise funds for the cause. And then in April, we're looking at possibly having a Chicago pilgrimage, so visiting the sites in Chicago for next year. So making that important. And the Cardinal is also very interested in having some type of marker made at the site of the 36 and Dearborn area where Father Tolton initially ministered and where St. Monica's was. And so that's something that we are also looking at. So those are just some of the aspects of looking at Father Augustus Tolton that I just wanted to share with you. But both Andrew and I are both open to going out and speaking about the cause of because we have been there, there's a passion, it really does reawaken a passion. So I encourage any of you to really consider doing a pilgrimage. Whether you come with something that would be with us officially through the Archdiocese, or think about your particular community, parish. One of the things that's happening, my pastor is talking about having something with the 4 neighboring parishes, about getting, talking with the 4 neighboring pastors about having a pilgrimage, and getting something together and taking a group down. And so it's something that you don't have to have the bishop or the cardinal to be there to have that pilgrimage, but that sense of pilgrimage, that sense of encountering and walking the path of that Holy One who walked is a powerful, transformative experience, and I really encourage you to be a part of that. But any questions or comments, insights, things that struck you?
Just remind me, I know when you came to Chicago, you picked St. Monica's because Monica's Augustine as well. Mm-hmm. Are there connections there to Augustine and spirituality, or is there something there, or is that just barking up their own tree?
I haven't seen anything yet. Like, even one of the things we talked about earlier was his name, and the question around his name, and that he was family history says he was named after his maternal grandfather, who was Augustus. And so you'll see a lot of things that say Augustine. He became Augustine when he went for baptismal records say Augustine. And the thought is that they put Augustine because they weren't going to use Augustus Caesar. He was going to name after Caesar. So he became Augustine. But he never, in any of his writings, he always signed A. He never signed Augustine. And he was known by, when he became a priest, he was known as Father Gus.
Yeah.
So again, getting away from, but historically in many black families, take for myself, see Vanessa White, is that Caritha is my first name. I was never called Caritha at home. It was called Caritha at school. And so I was always Vanessa. And so, but when I became a public record, I wanted to keep the C because it still was part of my name. So.
It is also a history for many African Americans, folks from the South whose names would be initials, and like CJ or whatever, and they'd start school, particularly up here in the North, that the teachers would give them a name.
Right, because it's like, no, you can't.
You
have to have a
I
name.
mean, the people in the Hispanic community tell you that many Pedros have become Peters in the school.
But no, but there isn't anything that's, except for the fact, there may have been that connection with the St. Monica.
Well, I mean, there's a particular challenge. I was thinking about preparation for this conference, but it's also more generally true of other universities. But the departments of African and Black diaspora studies, have they taken an interest in this?
we're hoping that's where we're going to really switch.
Yeah.
I mean, I see major part of my work as the director of the Office for Black Catholics is to really tell the story of Father Augustus Tolton and bring that, raise the interest there, and to tell the story in compelling ways. Because it is a fascinating story.
It's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
Because here at the Paul, I mean, I have some good relations with the people, and unfortunately couldn't come here today, but you know, they've done a big event on Pentecostal storefront church. So why not try to do something on Catholicism? You know, change the face of it.
It was interesting. You know, what's interesting was.
I mean, they have a picture of Tolton on the wall, along with Muhammad Ali and Oprah. So I kind of
So why
explained
not?
like you're already there.
Well, it's kind of interesting.
But it'd be interesting more, you know, if you could see, I don't know, Loyola, I don't know.
I don't know, we, at this point, we haven't been in any conversations, but it'd be interesting. As I said, we're at the very initial stages.
Yeah.
And just in the past year, I've seen an outgrowth, you know, more people knowing about Augustus Tolton. As I said, 10 years ago when I became the director of the Tolton program, and I kept something told me to keep Tolton at ctu.edu as my email address, and other people said, you know, change it to V. White, and I was like, no, I'm gonna keep it to Tolton. But still, it's like nobody knows Tolton. I always have to say, spelling Tolton. Now it's interesting how people know, and I'll get calls or whatever because of the fact that I'm connected to Tolton. So there is an increased interest. I did a presentation at my parish this past Sunday, and one of the people in the parish was a visitor, was Protestant, and he said, and it was interesting, he was white Protestant, and he came up to me afterwards, he said, you know, he need to get him at Black History Month. There needs to be a stamp. There needs to be a stamp. And I was like, yeah. So he was passionate, so he was telling them the story.
Yeah, but those kinds of things, you know, I mean, that's not far-fetched. I mean, I could see that as part of this pilgrimage toward the cause, you know.
I know.
So, yeah.
So, yes, I do think. Well, I'm conscious that it is 4:40, which was the time that I am supposed to be coming to an end. Mark, you have something for us?
Yeah, I think there is a simple survey here. Are you, Peter, you know, are you collecting these downstairs?
Someone should
Or am I
come by.
supposed to collect them here?
Someone comes by, maybe you can just hand them, drop them off.
Again, thank you for coming. And as I said, we were few but mighty, but you are being commissioned now to spread the word. And make sure, up here on this table, I have prayer cards. There's some prayer cards and brochures, and also the Catholic New World did a 4-page insert on Father Tolton. Please take some of those. And this upcoming week, in the next week or so, there should be a photo essay on the Cardinal's pilgrimage to Quincy. So check online. And if you go online to New Catholic World, the photos section, you'll see pictures from the Bishop Harris pilgrimage. That was part of that. So again, thank you. But let us end our time with the prayer of Father Tolton. And do you have?
We all have it.
You got your card?
It's in your folders.
Some of the brochure too in the back.
Do you have one?
I gave it away earlier.
You have one, Mark? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. O God, we give you thanks for your servant and priest, Father Augustus Tolton, who labored among us in times of contradiction, times that were both beautiful and paradoxical. His ministry helped lay the foundation for a truly Catholic gathering faith in our time. We stand in the shadow of his ministry. May his life continue to inspire us and imbue us with that confidence and hope that will forge a new evangelization for the church we love. Father in heaven, Father Tolton's suffering service sheds light upon our sorrows. We see them through the prism of your Son's passion and death. If it be your will, O God, glorify your servant, Father Tolton, by granting the favor I now request through this intercession.
so that all may know the goodness of this priest, whose memory looms large in the church he loved. Complete what you have begun in us, that we may work for the fulfillment of your kingdom. Not to us the glory, but glory to you, O God, through Jesus Christ, your Son and our Lord. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you are our God, living and reigning forever and ever. Amen. The Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.